Hello and welcome back, Martha and Gary, to our post-webinar Q&A session. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we've got a little bit of time to dive into the questions that we received during our live webinar that we just didn't have enough time to answer. So now we can take a moment and appreciate those beautiful questions. I would like to kick off with Kathy. Kathy is sharing a bit of her story. My company historically hasn't been interested in doing formalized resource management. We have a huge number of projects going on internally, and it means we don't have much visibility on how people spend their time. People don't like the idea of time tracking or reporting, particularly researchers who want freedom in how they spend their time. How do I convince the organization of the benefits?
This is a very loaded question. There's actually a lot to kind of take apart in that. But at the starting point, I suppose, is the question of, an appetite for resource management internally. I think that comes back to some of what we talked about during the webinar, which is what's the value proposition, what can it deliver, what are the current issues in the business, and what can you solve for? Equally, if you're putting together some sort of proposal, let's say, it doesn't have to be exhaustive, right? This could be a trial run of saying, well, look, give me 6 months, one person, and I'll show you results, right?
Nice.
And that's really gonna mean you'll have to kind of deliver on what you're talking about, of course, right? But it's a starting point. Now, as far as time tracking goes, I've seen this before. I've heard it a number of times before. Not everybody likes the idea of time tracking. One, it's too administrative. Two, big brother. To me, from a resource management perspective, if you don't see people's time, you're flying blind. It's as simple as that, right? Because even when we're, as a group, we talk about utilization a lot. If an organization is sitting at, let's say, 85, 90% billable utilization, most people go, great, close the book. No, RMs go much further than that. What's the mix of that utilization look like across the group? And what's the time being entered into the system and related to what activities? And it's really as much a support to the people themselves as it is the business. And what I mean by that is when you have appropriate time tracking, you're at less risk of someone burning out, for example. You're in a better position to suggest that actually additional resources are needed somewhere. You can really assess your kind of player A syndrome. It's always the same person they're going to for these questions or for this work. It's absolutely necessary. In my view, I don't think you can do it without the time entry piece. But RM itself and getting an appetite going for that, look at some of the literature out there. There's plenty of details from TSIA, RMI, Gartner. There's a ton of information out there that will speak to the efficacy of it. And you can start in a really, really small way. And you can quantify wins just by time alone. Hey, someone that does this today, we're going to take on that piece of work and we're going to transform it and we're going to optimize it. Don't know if that fully answers all of the questions, but
it was a great starter. So what I took away from your answer, Gary, was maybe offer to demonstrate the value in a time period of, let's say, half a year, 6 months, and really leverage the quick wins that you can implement in that time to, feed the appetite and show there is value. And if we invest more, there's even more value to be unleashed. Love it. Thank you, Gary. How about you, Martha?
Yeah, I would add on to those that one really good way to gain some buy-in, because right in this scenario, you don't have the leadership support. So you have to build ground up support. And one place where you can do that, it is talk to the different like the departmental teams, and pick the team that is saying they have too much work but not enough people, but they're not getting funded for the work that they're saying, look, we have all this high demand, we don't have enough people, everyone's working overtime. That might be one of like your key teams to start with, and just start with that and say, hey, one of the first steps is I want to help you. I'm going to do this as a side project, right? Would your team be open to us building the case for this? But in order to do that, we need at minimum what your planned portfolio of work is that your team is assigned on. So you don't have to fully enable time tracking, but you actually do have to have good updates on plan. So you won't have, so in that example, you'll have the plan, but you won't have the actuals. But if the plan shows that people are overworked and you need like, you look at the hours of the demand in terms of the workload, you look at the hours available using good assumptions, 40-hour work week, take 10% out for administrative, coaching, things like that. And then you can start to develop this picture of the resource management story of this is where we have resource shortages and why. And then you can start to
Fantastic.
back into that. If they're open to time tracking, then that gives you an idea of plan to actuals. But you're kind of using that tracking as a substitute to time tracking. I have seen places where RM still can be successful without time tracking, but you are reliant on constantly refreshing your plan because your plan will get out of sync. And you will still have that gap of not really knowing, you'll know what people think the work is, and then you won't have what it actually is, right? What it actually takes to do.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. I love your add-on to Gary's point of building out the case by starting with a team that already has too much work on, not enough people. They're doing overtime. This is the best place to start. There is a lot of value that you can demonstrate. So fantastic addition.
That
Thank
is
you.
a masterclass in what's the low-hanging fruit. I love that idea
Yeah.
that you pilot with a team where it's needed most, right?
Yeah.
Because by the way, even when you have the buy-in and you're going to build a full function for RMO, you have to do it in a phased way anyway, right? And you do tend to pilot in a specific region or a specific department. So that's why I love that. It's great, great response.
Nice. When we talk about quick wins and low-hanging fruit, that could help, especially in the early stages, to really demonstrate the value. What other techniques and helpful guidance have you seen, observed that you would like to share with other resource managers?
So
Wow.
this kind of quick wins.
Quick wins, low hanging fruit.
Yeah, it depends on what you can quantify. I think the first starting point is visibility. Where is the business at today? What data can you get your hands on? It doesn't have to be a direct department that you're working with today or that the ORMO was planned for even, but it's even that analysis of it and saying, actually, there's an opportunity here or there's a risk here, and it's highlighting some of those things and really looking towards what would improve them, right? And I think it's on both sides. When we talk about resource management, it's demand and supply, right? So we know that there's the kind of the forecast, the opportunities, the project, whatever work this is, whether it's external or internal, there's work to be done. And a lot of companies are even short on prioritizing that work, which makes a bit of a challenging situation for an RMO once it's established. So I think RMOs can offer early on a solid framework to build on in terms of processes for your forecasting as a starting point, which covers off the demand. And then you move over to the supply. So your skills inventory, maybe an internal resume of sorts. These kind of things where we're looking at our talent. What's our talent mix look like? Where do we need to cross-train? What opportunities are there? And equally, what's the career aspect of that too? How do people want to develop? What's their trajectory? Because you're going to have a mix of people, right? Different levels, junior, senior, some solid individual contributors, and then star stretch performers. And you want to make sure that that's all factored in. So it's demand, supply, it's the two elements.
Nice. Fantastic. Anything that you would like to add based on that, Martha?
Yeah, I'll just add that one of the quick ones that I've had success with in the past is having that ability to forecast with the data that I had and show where there's things that are trending, like what are the insights that your team can bring and that you can bring it as an RM that no one's seeing. We have a shortage coming up in 3 months. Like that, if you're able to do that, I think you're going to get a lot of support immediately because the leaders are going to start saying, wow, they know something that we don't. We should be listening to this. So if you have anything, any data that can support those insights, I think it's super helpful. If you have even a PM system, a project management system, you can use some of that information and try to see what data you can use to support that to call out some insights. But I think insights is really critical.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, Gary, from your comment, I'm also taking away you can offer a framework for prioritization so that the demand side is better handled as one low hanging fruit. And Martha, from you, I'm taking away a low hanging fruit could be on the forecasting side of things using data. What's trending? What insights can we surface to the business that were not in focus, were not visible before, that no one else is seeing? Right.
Yeah, and some of these things are, you don't think of every moment, but even down to Martha, you spoke about this in the webinar somewhat in terms of, outsourcing your third party strategy. So many wins there in looking at what way your workforce is set up. But equally on the delivery side, it's just that basic idea of what do we get into the SOW? What do we sell from a dollar value perspective? And what did we bill, right? Particularly if you align that with the end dates of projects or the end dates of contracts, because you can very quickly tell a senior stakeholder, hey, we're leaving like 30% of revenue on the table. What's going on? That gets people listening very, very quick and gets them interested in what else you can find. And to Martha's point, right? The insights and that stream of work for RMs is going to get more and more and more important because as the technology improves and there's efficiencies made there, dashboards, analytics, AI, there's going to need to be a human element on the side of it to interpret it, articulate it, and put it in front of people in the right context.
Very nice. Yes, absolutely agree. Wonderful. Let's dive into question number 2, raised by Jennifer. Jennifer is sharing, my company went through a layoff last year, which greatly affected the RMO, which has forced us into being only reactive and administrative due to the decreased headcount. Is there an ideal ratio of resource manager to team size that better positions an RMO to start becoming a more strategic partner?
Yeah, I could give my numbers. I think some of it is going to also depend on how integrated your RM team is across the organization and how many teams like do you support. So some RM teams aren't as ingrained in like hiring. Maybe you give a forecast and you hand that off to HR. I think things like that are important to call out like all the areas in the value stream that you are involved in as an RM team. But my rule of thumb is about 80 to 1. So 80 resources to 1 resource manager. And that's a stretch, I think, depending on how involved your team is across the organization. If you're involved in transformation initiatives that are taking large amount of time, even 80 can feel like a lot for your team members or for each RM. And then you have to really think about how to be efficient with that time, right? How are you scaling across the 80, right? You can't do one-on-ones with 80 people every month. And I think that's something that I talk to my team about, like, how can we streamline this into email follow-up communication and what things maybe are not critical that you can pull out of so that you can have that time for the strategy time, right? Sitting in each manager's team meeting is maybe not the best leverage time. but we need to get in front of our customers and the VPs and talk about the value and how to engage with us. And we need to have good returns on like the time that they spend with us and when they come to us that we're meeting their demands. So that's my rule of thumb.
Nice, 1 to 80, but very much depending on context and involvement, level of involvement. What about you, Gary?
Yeah, look, Martha's absolutely right that the context for the individual situations are quite different, right? I mean, is the RMO centralized or is it decentralized? That will matter. And even though we're all speaking resource management language, we're, in some cases assuming that the duties, the roles, the responsibilities are the same, and they're never the same. That's always what's fascinating about talking to different resource managers or leaders of RM teams, because in some cases they are people managers to the people they are placing for the staff themselves. In other cases, they've got a ton of other duties outside of the scope of what a traditional RM role would be. So I think it comes down to that. It comes down to the company too, right? From an allocation and a redeployment perspective or an assignment perspective, what's the churn? What's the, how long and how complex are the projects? Again, you talk to one resource manager who staffs on a 2-week basis. You speak to another where once they've assigned someone, they're gone for 12 months or they're gone for 6 months. So it's dramatically different. So in terms of the actual, to answer the question of around ratio, we've tried to stick to some sort of guidance for a 1 staffing manager per 100 resources, right? That's what we've tried to stick to. But I can equally already tell you that even within my team, there's a variance there because it depends on the rest of the work what they're handling and what practice or business unit they're aligned to. Because there are other things that take place and that are required. So more specifically, my team handles pipeline management. We're not responsible for, generating the sales, but once there's an opportunity there, we set up the project so we can rely on the data. So we have an accurate financial forecast, so we have an accurate resource forecast, so we can follow strong processes and the data is good. Again, that takes time. So, if you've got more work on the demand side, you probably need to reduce the supply or vice versa. So it's not an easy question to answer because it's highly dependent on the business. I empathize with the fact that, when there's layoffs, there's a dramatic shift, not just in, anxiety, I suppose, at a company level, but there's a knock-on effect to it. And here we're, it's in the question, it's affecting the RMO, and how do we manage this? How can we stay strategic? I just say optimize where you can, right? Optimize and make efficiencies where you can, but ultimately, if it needs to come down to a difficult conversation, have the difficult conversation too. It just might not be, best in the current climate, so you need to kind of position yourself in the right way. But I like the fact that most resource managers and most people working in this industry are very good at being diplomatic, but also they have backbone. They're able to stand in that room and say, hey, this is the case I'm making and this is why. So
nice. Yeah. Optimize where you can and have backbone.
go down in history.
Yeah. Martha, in the context of what Jennifer was sharing around the changes in the business, the layoffs, and the result she has noticed on the RMO as a result, what other advice would you have for anyone in a similar situation? How can you really maintain as strategic as possible in that context and scenario?
Yeah, it is challenging, and I do empathize as well. When you feel like you're in that transactional mode because you have to stay afloat, right? You have so many requests coming in and you're trying to answer them and get people staffed and get people allocated. Unfortunately, I think in some of those scenarios, there's a few things that can help. One thing I've used in the past is to try to advocate for myself that I needed help. And so I started tracking my own time and showing that as a RM, I was too thinly spread out and I was working overtime or whatever it was to make ends meet for the department. And then also when there was time off, what was the impact to the organization because we didn't have really good coverage. So I think that was another thing. And that helped me create a business case for perhaps like an entry level role to help support the team in some of those transactions. So we could
Nice.
lower the cost of the team, still bring in that added support, still have coverage, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, and then I've seen this work for other people in different roles in different companies, is to still prioritize some of that leadership feedback. You got to have time to manage up. And that might mean you stay extra a little bit, unfortunately, or it might mean some trade-offs somewhere else, right? So, but I've seen people really excel by not forgetting to manage up. So you have to figure out a way to fit that in.
Mm. Yeah, to have that relationship, continue to build the trust with the leadership team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Show the results, make sure you get in front of leaders at some, periodic basis. And, maybe there's some things that can be deprioritized or automated, like get creative.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Automate.
even if you can't get in front of people, I mean, some sort of, at minimum a QBR or an MBR, monthly business review, or some sort of status report that's going out, that even if you feel like you're in the weeds, you're trying to keep your head above water, there's so much coming at the team with limited internal capacity to deal with it. Just even if you need to time block your own calendar to say, no matter what happens, I am ruthlessly prioritizing getting this status report out at minimum to the leaders that says, hey, we're still thinking strategically. We're still highlighting to you what we think is going to occur, what needs to happen, what decisions you need to make, what risks are out there, right? All of that's really, really important. And even if you can't have a conversation, that there's something that is going out that shows, that keeps you visible, which is incredibly important too.
Yeah, very nice. So referring back to the dance of focusing internally and externally as an RMO, I hear you say, even if times get challenging, do not forget the external focus, that connection with the leadership team, with the wider stakeholder group, even if it's very hard to make that possible given the restrictions and limitations. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you, Jennifer, for asking the question as well. Next up, I would like to refer to Michael's point. He mentioned transparency with leaders as a key focus for resource management in 2024. A question I would like to pose to you is, how can resource managers increase transparency with leaders? What precise, actionable advice do you have to make that possible?
Yeah, I'd say to in a nutshell, I think you have to think about your communication channels and how you can give that transparency, whether it be a monthly dashboard. I know that's something that we're working on. You can also do executive summaries, monthly executive summaries. You can use your company's portal if you have any intranet portals where you can share out. I've seen people do monthly updates. I've seen people do monthly newsletter, right? And share the wins and if there's any place to say these are the risks, these are the blockers, right? These are the opportunities, right? I think those are good ways to do that. And like we talked about in the webinar, don't forget to get that one-on-one time with your leadership and share, like, here's what we're working on, here's what we're doing really well, and here's an area where I could use your support. I think that transparency and calling out, like, okay, we are accountable for this and we need this, and maybe there's a gap there, and how can we solve it, right? So I think that's important.
Wow, some very practical, great ideas. Thank you very much, Martha. Is there anything else that you would like to add, Gary?
Very similar. I mean, I like the idea of, you have to prioritize the time, particularly with the leadership. Even if you're not directly reporting there, there's certainly a dotted line there of some description, right? They're your key stakeholders. And part of that as well is, whether it's, whether it's a dashboard, whether it's a status report, whether it's a newsletter. I mean, the point really is that there's some form of communication going on. And that communication needs to be conscious or aware of, I suppose, that the time that they have to really look at what you're sending to. So I would kind of, I suppose, just tack on that we should probably try and demystify as much as we can. I said earlier on in the webinar, humanize that data. What does that really mean? And because what it really means is you could look at data and say, well, I think that means we have a risk here, and you can highlight that risk, or there might be an action that needs to be taken. And it's not always clear to people that there is an action to be taken, actually. I'm putting this in front of you and telling you this story with the data because I actually want you to do something. I want you to speak with your team, or I want you to talk to sales, or I want you to, and again, that's not always comfortable for a staffing manager or a staffing coordinator, whatever level you're at, that's not always comfortable.
Right.
But, feel empowered to do it. Even if you are not organizationally empowered to do it, feel empowered to do it, right?
By Gary. Feel empowered by Gary.
Nominate yourself. Go in there, highlight what you need, let them know what's going on, give them the visibility.
I love that so much. I would also like to add to that around the comms we're using and humanizing the way we communicate. It's also to really be empathetic. Who is going to read this dashboard, intranet, monthly update, newsletter, report, and how do they like to consume data, right? So does it always need to be a written text form, another email, another, hard thing to consume? Can we get creative in how we share updates? Can we make it more visual? Can we, find new ways to maybe use different mediums such as video, or also, Martha, you talked about a roadshow, right? So how can we tap into the human side of us, which is more creative and diverse than just messages in a text form? Yeah.
And even in the PowerPoint, for example, and in other, technology, we can record our screens. We can do this in multiple different ways. So that's a great point, Nora. I mean, the idea of, hey, how do I make this different? Because maybe this person receives a dozen status reports from
exactly
with different priorities, and it's just all gone by the way. It's like automating email notifications. They're useful, but if you do too many of them, that's it. You've lost your audience. No one's looking at them. They're just getting filed away into a specific folder. So what makes it pop? What makes it stand out? How can you do that? And hey, there's no shame in asking too.
Yeah.
Hey, how do you, what are you interested in seeing? Are you interested in hearing about? And would you prefer, it's like with colleagues, do you want me to IM you? Do you want an email? Do you prefer a phone call? And everybody's different in that regard, right?
Love it. Yeah. Again, coming back to really understanding the needs of your customer, right? And what best serves them. And also feel free to tap into if your organization has any design function, right? Designers or creative team of some sort, right? It can be a very good activity of breaking down silos to ask for help. Hey, could you help me with communicating this in a different way? Can we partner up on this, right? you will have two birds with one stone.
Right. And even look, it makes me think there's licenses out there for specific software for videos or for editing or whatever.
Yes.
Have fun with it. Do an
Yeah.
animated video that delivers your status report. Here's the chart.
Experiment.
You insert the image, right? And you have the person alongside it saying, this means, i.e., humanizing the data, this means we need to take action, right, on step 1 or 2. Have fun with it. Yeah.
Yes, and just try out different things and ask for feedback. How is this working for you? Is this a better way of communicating, or what else could we try? Right? Yeah, I love that. That's the spirit, Gary. Absolutely agree. And lastly, I would like to pick Monica's point around what are some ways of getting more feedback on quality matches and the employee experience? We alluded to those harder to measure KPIs, like the quality of matches and the employee experience earlier. So, yeah, what are some ways we can start to, get feedback and measure them in some form or shape?
Yeah, I haven't figured nailed this one down yet. I think we're spending a lot of time having conversations with leaders on the quality of matches that we're providing. I think you could do if you have external customers that are not internal, where you kind of don't have the opportunity to have those dialogue. I think that you could have a customer sat at the end of like a project implementation, right? So that could be part of that, and you can hear back from your leadership. On the internal side, we are having a lot of meetings as well with our line managers. They own the coaching and an employee experience, but they don't own the resourcing activity. So we have office hours with them. We have different meetings that we do with them. And we're also doing a partnership between their organization with the group of people managers and our team. We're sharing back roles and expectations, mutual challenges and opportunities, so that we can continue to optimize how the process is going. But super critical that I think the question called out was creating the opportunity to gain feedback. I think that's an important point, and I really like that this person's so aware, right, that that's critical to your success and that you have to create those opportunities. But we're still working through that, but we have some venues that we use. What about
Thank you
you?
so much, Martha.
Yeah, look, I won't say we have this now. Again, like most things in resource management, we certainly don't have this one nailed down. And some of it comes back to some of the other questions that already came up. Internal capacity. What are the priorities for the RMO? And we already know the resource management has tentacles into the rest of the business. There's no doubt about that. But it's also about, well, what size is your RM team? What are the duties of that? How do you, again, how do you get to that strategic place, right? I mean, externally, at least, because there's two components to this, right? The external and the internal. And when I say the external, I mean from a professional services consulting perspective, it's the direct customer, right? Our accounts and our customers. I mean, if our extension rate is pretty solid, we've probably done a good job with who we've assigned there, right? If our CSAT scores are positive, we've probably equally done a good job there. If our roll-off rate is limited, and what I mean by that is we've gone as far as tracking things like if someone has had to be rolled off an assignment, do you have we don't look at it all the time, but it's useful to have different levers and triggers in your system or in your PSA, PPM, whatever you're using, to understand how do you quantify that and what does it look like. So that's on the customer side. Let's say all of those numbers look good. It's all positive. Yet you talk to someone on a team and they're not happy because they've been extended 15 times on the same project and they want to see something new, or they're not happy where they are because they're flying solo, or whatever the case may be. You need to kind of think about how this ties into maybe HR metrics too.
Mm.
What's our retention rate, right?
Mm.
What's attrition look like, and how is that trending? I would add into that, because there's one that people forget, is promotion. Now we want to be careful here. That's based on how someone is performing, obviously, and the needs of the business and everything else factored in. But if people are moving up in the organization, they are star stretch opportunities. They are things that are changing and obviously pointing to, this person was given an opportunity, they shone on that project, and now they're moving on to something better, and they're going to be a lead next, or whatever the case may be. So I think some of the HR aspects need to be kind of factored in as well. But at minimum, you have to ask the question. To Martha's point, can it scale, right? Efficiently, can you scale it? We can't have a conversation with each individual about every allocation, about every redeployment. We equally can't have that conversation with their manager, because there's too many people and it gets too wide, and the RM team is only so yay big, right? So how do we efficiently do it? You have to ask the question. Internal survey, check the polls, ask the direct questions you want to know the answer to. But, word of caution, you'll get the responses. And if it's anonymous, they'll be genuine, right? So what comes back at you. But I think it's important to figure out where people sit. Are they happy with the assignments they've had? Are they getting enough opportunity? Yeah.
Fantastic. Awesome. I thank both of you very, very much for that very insightful Q&A after the webinar session. Now, as we're departing, not just the webinar, but also this post Q&A session, is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with? Anything in regards to our topic of resource management mistakes, not to repeat in 2024? Any final words of wisdom or heartfelt advice to the community?
No one has it perfectly figured out. They just don't, right? And there's a constant, never-ending opportunity for RMs to stretch and to learn more about the business and to have more of a positive impact. So don't sweat the mistakes, I suppose. Mistakes are going to get made. And again, I mean, the theme of the webinar was, not to repeat. And I think that's a key part of it. If you've really learned from it, is it really a mistake? You've taken something away, but you're not repeating it, right? I mean, that's the key part of it, that, hey, lesson learned, what am I gonna do in the future? But everybody is continuously developing. That means whoever's heading up the RMO is continuously developing. C-suite are continuing to develop and improve, right? It's not a static thing. So I'd say don't sweat the small stuff, ruthlessly prioritize, and go after things that get you recognized, get you visible, and that, continue to elevate, let's say, the resource management function to its rightful place, which, I mean, I'm biased, but I think it should really be up there. So yeah, that's it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Gary, for your final words. How about you, Martha?
Yeah, hard to top that, but I would say, continue growing, continue developing yourself as well, your team, see how how you can continue to grow. And it may not be in a linear fashion with resource management, meaning maybe a skill to grow in is communications, and you can bring that back to resource management. Maybe it's analysis and really getting stronger in analytics or forecasting or data modeling, right? The opportunities are really out there for resource management. So I would just say, keep the energy high, keep going, and keep learning from the challenges, right? Like Gary said, it's an opportunity to get it right. And I hope that we've shared some insights that will help people avoid a few scraped elbows.
Yes. Well put. Absolutely agree. Well, again, both of you, thank you very, very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And take good care.
Thank you, Nora. Thanks, Martha.
Thanks. Bye.